I want to switch gears here, Hal, and talk about another big story. This coming from Fox News' Jennifer Griffin reporting that the Pentagon is deploying 10 F-35 stealth fighter jets to Puerto Rico for counter-narcotics tasking in the Caribbean. A source familiar confirms to Fox News per Lucas Tomlinson. And I want to play out his report, and then we'll talk about it on the back end. Hal.
Okay.
If they do put us in a dangerous position, they'll be shut down.
The Pentagon called the flyover of armed Venezuelan F-16s over the USS Jason Dunham highly provocative. The flyover took place 2 days after U.S. forces launched a strike on a Venezuelan drug boat in the Caribbean. President Trump said all 11 members of the Tren de Aragua gang on board were killed. The State Department declared the group a foreign terrorist organization in February. A Republican member of the Senate Armed Services Committee called the strike justified.
The boat had been warned to stop. They chose not to. They were clearly running drugs. We had been tracking it since it left Venezuela.
Many Democrats called the strike a violation of international law.
They think they can get away with this. God knows what they are going to do next. So that's what we're looking to right now, and there is reason to believe that this was not a legal action.
President Trump's defense secretary says the actions are justified after 400,000 Americans died from drug overdoses during the Biden administration.
A foreign terrorist organization poisoning your people with drugs coming from a drug cartel is no different than Al-Qaeda.
At the height of the Obama administration, the U.S. military carried out drone strikes in 7 different countries: Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, Libya, Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia. Over 500 in all, killing an estimated 3,500 people, including hundreds of civilians. President Trump also made it official, changing the name of the Department of Defense.
We're going Department of War.
This marks the second time in U.S. history the Department of War nomenclature has been used to describe the cabinet that oversees the U.S. military. The first time was back in 1789. Congress still needs to approve the name change. At the White House, Lucas Tomlinson, Fox News.
And Lucas continues to report there, saying President Trump warns Venezuela that if any more fighter jets threaten U.S. warships in the Caribbean, they will be shot down. Let's bring in back Hal Kempfer to react to this news. And yeah, President Trump and the administration really going hard on these narco-terrorists.
Well, very much so, and also going hard on, I mean, you can call Venezuela a narco state. It has been called that many times. And certainly President Trump and others made it clear that Maduro was tied to the boat that was actually hit with our U.S. forces, that was destroyed as it was fleeing, as it wouldn't stop. And so, yeah, and we designated Tren de Aragua and a number of other cartels as terrorist groups. We call them narco terrorists. So as a terrorist group, they fall under a different body of law. In fact, under international law, they're treated differently than they would if they were just a transnational criminal organization. So it does open up some other use of force options. The rules of engagement shift when confronting a terrorist that's fleeing, and you have a different set of parameters by what you believe they might do. And we've heard all those articulated certainly by Secretary Rubio, Secretary Hegseth, the president himself have all said the same thing. Now, the 10 F-35s. Okay, what we have down there is about 7 warships sitting off in that area of the world. By the way, it's not just narcotics down there. If you go next door to Guyana, they have this massive offshore oil capability that they're developing, which is going to transform the economy of Guyana. But it's also one that Venezuela has made threats that they're going to invade and take over actually most of the territory of Guyana, not so much because they want the land, they want the exclusive economic zone to take over the oil field out there. So we're making a pretty strong statement to Venezuela on many different levels, which is don't do things, especially at sea, which you may regret. Now, there is 7 warships down there. Part of that's what's called an amphibious ready group. An amphibious ready group has a Marine Expeditionary Unit. I believe it's the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit out of Norfolk is down there. They have about 22 Marines and sailors total. If you put it with the amphibious ready group and the MEU, it's about 4,500. But the MEU itself has about 2,200 Marines and sailors, and they have a composite squadron on board. They have a battalion of Marines as the ground combat element. They have a logistics element, a command element with them as well. However, the Marines, because we need that VSTOL capability, that vertical short takeoff and landing capability, we fly the F-35Bs. Very capable aircraft. It is the F-35 series, but there are compromises. There are certain things in order to get VSTOL, they had to kind of make some trade-offs, if you will. So it's not necessarily the air superiority fighter that you might want, say, with an F-35A, which the Air Force flies, or an F-35C that the Navy flies. I don't know, and I cannot find out. I looked everywhere what type of F-35s are in Puerto Rico. All I know is it says F-35s. I'm assuming they're an Air National Guard base. They could very well be Air Force, although they could be Navy. But they are not vertical short takeoff and landing. They take off and land like every other plane, on a runway and stuff. But because they do that, they can carry stuff that an F-35B couldn't. Let me just put it this way. If you're looking to confront an F-16 in the air, you would probably want either an A or a C variant versus the B variant that the Marines fly. Now, keep in mind, I'm not biased. I'll say the Marines are far better pilots, far better looking pilots, as we know, and of course, superior to all the pilots in the world in every other way. However, their aircraft, if you want to do air-to-air fighting, the A and the C variants are a little bit better for what you want to do there. So I think that's what we put out there. And they have that stealth capability. So if the F-16s that the Venezuelans bought in the 80s come out there and mess with our warships again, they could look to the left or look to the right and suddenly find out that they are right next to F-35s or ready to shoot them out of the sky. And I think that will be a very strong message. It also, if you look at the Caribbean, there are certain gaps. There's like 4 major channels that the maritime smugglers go through. This gives us an ability to react in a very decisive manner to those 4 channels with some overwhelming firepower, if you want to put it that way, very quickly. It's an F-35, so it's going to get out there as fast as anything can get out there. So if we want to do more maritime interdictions, we can do that. Also keep in mind that they fly drugs as well. So it gives us the capability to do air interdictions. And some of this is overcoming the fact that after the Cold War was done, after the U.S. pulled out of Panama, U.S. Southern Command moved into Florida versus being headquartered down in Panama. All of our bases in Panama closed. We don't have as robust a basing presence in the Caribbean or Latin America, Central, South America, certainly Central America, as we had before. So putting the F-35s in Puerto Rico, probably not an optimal location for them, but a heck of a lot better than F-35, say, flying out of Florida or something like that. And that's why they're down there. And I imagine, I didn't see anything on this, I would be surprised if we didn't move some other aviation assets out there to support them, like tanker support for in-flight refueling, and probably some command and control aircraft to like AWACS or something that could provide some support or something like that. Not necessarily AWACS per se, but something like that.
Yeah, great insight, Hal. And another question I have is, all right, Maduro has a $50 million bounty on his head. When do you think someone's going to really take advantage of that?
As soon as they can. I'm sure there's folks out there, not just in Venezuela, but somewhere in that area, going $50 million to go a long way. Keep in mind, Maduro has a very extensive personal security setup. He knows that a lot of people like to take him out, and he's probably more concerned about his military than anything else. He's had to do some rather extraordinary things to essentially pay off the military to make sure that they don't try to overthrow him in a coup. And so he keeps a very close eye on his security forces across the board. Obviously he's concerned because, there was that, what he says was a U.S.-backed coup attempt, but there was some Americans that went down there who worked with some Venezuelans, who were obviously trying to foment a change of regime, shall we say. And some Americans ended up in prison because of that. I think they've been returned, as I recall, but he's very concerned about that, and he knows he's got that. But we put big dollars on top of other heads before, and it doesn't necessarily turn into a situation where they arrive somewhere to be tried or they're extradited or whatever. And so, I'm not saying it's completely symbolic, but it has a lot of symbolism, doesn't necessarily produce the results we want in the time we want it.
How it gets, well, what we need is it doesn't get serious until you have a deck of cards after you. Once you have your name on the deck of cards or your face, I think it's ready.
I think you're right, and what a deal, so to speak. All right, but and I've been to a couple things where we had decks of cards, and the deck of cards, I should mention, is almost overcome by events by the time they get those things distributed, because by the time we get it out there, we've already taken out several key cards.
Right.
So it's always interesting. Although I do recall one thing where we said it was a Chemical Ali in Iraq. I think we killed him 4 times before we actually killed him. So that's a card you just had to set aside because you're never quite sure, and it's like, I'm not sure if he's been taken out of the deck or not.
And maybe that was the Joker or something.
Well, if you're into taking out, associates of Saddam Hussein, I guess it's humorous, but I'm sure some people find that reaching.
Right. Hal Kempfer, thanks so much again for joining us on Live Now from Fox. Always great to speak with you and get your insight on these world matters. We appreciate it.